unlimited drama series.
The night before my wedding, I stood outside the bridal suite door at the Willowbrook Manor, holding 2 cups of coffee I'd brought for my fiancée Sarah and her maid of honor, when I heard them casting votes on whether I was worth keeping. "Okay, ladies, final tally," Sarah's voice carried through the heavy oak door, sharp with authority. "All in favor of me dumping David tomorrow instead of going through with this charade?" My hand froze on the doorknob. Coffee sloshed over the rim of 1 cup, burning my fingers. "I vote yes," came the nasal voice of Sarah's best friend Jessica. "Honestly, Sarah, you could do so much better. David's controlling, he's got no real ambition, and let's be honest, he doesn't fit into our world." "Agreed," chimed in another voice, I recognized as Melissa, Sarah's law school roommate. "Plus, did you see how he acted at the rehearsal dinner? Making jokes about your family's money? So inappropriate." "But the deposits are already paid," Sarah said, and I could hear her pacing in those expensive heels she'd bought specifically for tonight. "My parents will kill me if I waste another $50,000. "Your parents have plenty of money," Jessica laughed. "Besides, think of the content this would generate for your Instagram. Why I called off my wedding, a thread. You'd gain like 50,000 followers overnight." I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sarah had built quite the following as a lifestyle influencer while working her way up at Morrison & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. Her carefully curated life of designer handbags, exotic vacations, and legal victories had attracted nearly 200,000 followers, who hung on her every perfectly filtered word. "The thing is," Sarah's voice dropped lower, more calculating, "David's not completely useless. He makes decent money in tech, and he worships the ground I walk on. I could mold him into something acceptable." "Or you could cut your losses now," Melissa countered. "Remember Jake from the gym? Now that's husband material. Rich family, owns 3 fitness centers, and those abs." "Jake Morrison," Sarah sighed dreamily. "God, you're right. We've been texting constantly. He gets me in ways David never could." "Morrison. The same last name as her law firm." "Of course. So what's it going to be?" Jessica pressed. "Freedom or settling for mediocrity?" The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I found myself holding my breath, coffee growing cold in my trembling hands. "I'll give him one chance," Sarah finally declared. "Tomorrow at the ceremony. I want him to publicly apologize for embarrassing me at the rehearsal dinner. If he can humble himself in front of everyone, prove he knows his place, then maybe we can make this work." "And if he doesn't?" Melissa asked. "Then I'll call it off right there at the altar." Can you imagine the drama? The photos? My followers would eat it up. The 3 of them dissolved into laughter, the sound like breaking glass in my ears. I set the coffee cups down on a nearby table and walked away, my mind already spinning with possibilities. They wanted drama? They wanted content for social media? Fine. I'd give them something they'd never forget. The rest of that night, I barely slept. I lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Sarah's gentle breathing beside me when she finally came to bed around 2 a.m., reeking of champagne and expensive perfume. She'd whispered, "I love you," as she curled up against my back, and I'd had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. By morning, I had a plan. The Willowbrook Manor looked like something out of a Gothic novel in the gray October light. Built in 1897 by some railroad baron, it had been converted into an event space in the 90s, but you could still see the decay creeping in around the edges, peeling paint on the window frames, moss growing between the stone blocks, and a persistent smell of mildew that no amount of expensive floral arrangements could mask. Perfect. I'd spent the early morning hours making preparations while Sarah got pampered at the hotel spa with her bridesmaids. A few phone calls, a trip to the local farmer's market, and a conversation with my buddy Marcus, who ran sound equipment for events, had set everything in motion. "You sure about this, man?" Marcus had asked when I explained what I needed. "This is going to be nuclear." "They want a show," I'd replied, handing him $500 in cash. "Let's give them one they'll never forget." Now, standing at the altar in my rented tuxedo, I watched Sarah glide down the aisle in her $5,000 dress, her smile radiant for the cameras. Her father, a stern man who'd made his fortune in real estate, walked beside her with the expression of someone attending a funeral rather than a wedding. The guests filled the manor's great hall, Sarah's side packed with her law firm colleagues, influencer friends, and various social climbers, while my side held my parents, a few college buddies, and some coworkers from the tech company where I worked as a systems administrator. Sarah's mother, Patricia, sat in the front row wearing a hat that probably cost more than my car payment, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. She'd never liked me, had made that clear from the moment Sarah brought me home 3 years ago. He's very earnest, she told Sarah within my earshot. The word earnest delivered like a diagnosis of terminal illness. The officiant, a friend of Sarah's family, began the ceremony with the usual platitudes about love and commitment. I nodded at the appropriate moments, said I do when prompted, and waited for my moment. The bride and groom have prepared their own vows, the officiant announced. David, would you like to go first? This was it. Sarah's eyes met mine, and I saw the expectation there, the demand for public submission disguised as love. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hall, before I share my vows, I have something else I'd like to say. I pulled out my phone and nodded to Marcus, who was manning the sound booth at the back of the hall. The speakers crackled to life. Last night, I recorded a conversation that I think everyone should hear, I announced. Sarah's face went white. David, what are you? But her voice was drowned out by the audio, now blasting through the sound system. Her own voice crystal clear, discussing whether I was worth keeping, debating my value like I was a stock option. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sarah's father shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. Her mother looked like she might faint. Turn it off, Sarah shrieked, lunging for my phone. But I was already moving, pulling the second part of my plan into action. Hidden beneath the altar were 5 large buckets of overripe fruit and vegetables I'd purchased that morning. Tomatoes, peaches, pears, all perfectly rotten and reeking. You wanted to know if I'd humble myself, I said, hefting the first bucket. Here's my answer. I hurled the contents directly at Sarah. Rotten tomatoes exploded across her designer dress, sending chunks of putrid fruit flying into the front rows. The smell was instantaneous and overwhelming. Sarah screamed, slipping on a mushy peach and going down hard on her backside. Her carefully arranged hair, which had taken 3 hours to perfect, was now decorated with decomposing fruit. David, stop! My mother cried from the crowd, but I was far from finished. The second bucket caught Jessica as she tried to rush the altar to help Sarah. Rotten pears splattered across her bridesmaid dress, and she went down on the slippery floor, her expensive shoes providing no traction against the fruit pulp. Chaos erupted. Guests were screaming, some running for the exits, others pulling out their phones to record the mayhem. Sarah's father charged toward me, but slipped on a rotten apple and crashed into the flower arrangements, sending white roses flying. This is for 3 years of being treated like your pet project, I shouted over the noise, emptying the third bucket in a wide arc that caught several of Sarah's law firm colleagues. For every snide comment, every condescending look, every time you made me feel like I should be grateful you were slumming it with me. Sarah was sobbing now, trying to scrape fruit pulp out of her eyes. You're insane. You're absolutely insane. No, I said, grabbing the fourth bucket. I'm just done pretending to be someone I'm not, to fit into your pathetic little world. This bucket I saved for Patricia, Sarah's mother, who had spent 3 years making subtle digs about my family's modest background. The rotten fruit caught her square in her expensive hat, and she shrieked like a banshee. And this, I said, hoisting the final bucket, is for Jake Morrison and all the other guys you've been texting behind my back. The last of the rotten fruit arced through the air, catching not just Sarah, but several of her influencer friends, who had been trying to help her up. The Great Hall now looked like a war zone, with well-dressed people slipping and sliding through fruit pulp, their expensive clothes ruined. By the way, I announced, my voice still carrying clearly through Marcus's sound system. I've accepted a position with a tech firm in Seattle. I start Monday. Consider this my resignation from your little social experiment. I dropped the empty bucket and walked down the aisle, stepping carefully around the fruit carnage. As I passed my parents, I paused. I'm sorry you had to see this, I told them quietly. But some things can't be handled with quiet dignity. My father, a man who'd worked construction for 30 years and understood something about standing up to bullies, just nodded. Do what you have to do, son. Behind me, Sarah was still screaming, her voice hoarse with rage and humiliation. I'll destroy you for this. I'll ruin your life. Everyone will know what kind of psychopath you are. I turned back one final time, surveying the chaos I'd created. Rotten fruit dripped from the manor's ancient chandeliers. The wedding cake had been knocked over in the melee, white frosting mixing with fruit pulp on the floor. Sarah's perfect influencer life was literally and figuratively in ruins. Looking forward to the content, I called back to her. Don't forget to tag me. Then I walked out into the gray October afternoon, breathing free air for the first time in 3 years. 6 months in Seattle had been exactly what I needed. The tech job paid well. The city was full of people who didn't care about your family's pedigree or whether you knew which fork to use for the salad course. I'd found a decent apartment in Capitol Hill, started going to a gym where nobody knew my history, and began the slow process of rebuilding my life. But I'd also spent those months planning. Every notification from Sarah's social media accounts, every tagged photo from her friends, every article about the wedding day disaster that had gone viral on TikTok and Twitter, I'd monitored it all. Sarah had indeed turned our destroyed wedding into content, spinning herself as the victim of an abusive relationship with a clearly unstable man. Her follower count had exploded to over 500,000. She'd also moved fast with Jake Morrison. Within a month of our non-wedding, she was posting gym selfies with her trainer and life coach. By month 3, they were Instagram official. By month 6, she was living in his downtown loft and had been promoted to senior associate at Morrison & Associates, a promotion that surely had nothing to do with her new relationship with the founding partner's son. The irony was delicious. But what really caught my attention was something most people wouldn't have noticed. In the background of Sarah's carefully curated posts, I could see the cracks forming. Jessica and Melissa, her former best friends, were notably absent from recent photos. Her parents had stopped appearing in her content entirely after a cryptic post about toxic family dynamics. Even some of her law firm colleagues seemed to be keeping their distance. It was time to come home. I'd kept my old apartment in Millbrook, the upscale suburb where Sarah and I had lived together. Technically, the lease was in my name, though she'd been staying there since I left. When I showed up unannounced on a Thursday evening in April, I found her entertaining Jake in what used to be our living room. Hello, Sarah, I said, using my key to walk right in. She nearly jumped out of her skin, spilling wine all over her white designer couch. Jake, who was even more ridiculously handsome in person than in photos, shot to his feet like he was ready for a fight. What the hell are you doing here? Sarah demanded. This is harassment. I have a restraining order. No, you don't, I replied calmly, setting down my suitcase. I checked. You filed for one, but it was denied because throwing rotten fruit at someone once doesn't constitute a pattern of stalking behavior. Also, this is my apartment. My name on the lease, my security deposit. Jake stepped forward, all 6 feet of sculpted muscle and expensive athleisure wear. I think you should leave, buddy. I don't think we've been properly introduced, I said, extending my hand with a smile. David Chen, you must be Jake Morrison, the trust fund baby who's been playing house with my ex-fiancée. His face darkened. Trust fund baby? Oh, did Sarah not mention that part? I asked innocently. How your daddy owns the law firm where she works. How convenient that she got promoted right after you two started dating. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Get out, Sarah hissed. Get out right now, or I'm calling the police. Go ahead, I said, pulling out my own phone. I'll call them too. We can discuss how you've been living in my apartment without permission for 6 months. I'm sure they'll find that interesting. The truth was I had no intention of actually kicking her out. Not yet. This was just the opening move. What do you want? Jake asked, his voice tight with controlled aggression. Just to talk, I said. It's been 6 months, after all. I thought we could catch up. Sarah, you look different. She did. The stress was showing around her eyes despite the professional makeup. Her Instagram posts might have been getting thousands of likes, but up close, I could see the toll it was taking. You look exactly the same, she replied coldly. Still a bitter little man who can't handle being rejected. Rejected? I laughed. Is that the story you're telling yourself? You were planning to humiliate me at our wedding, Sarah. I just beat you to it. That's not, she started, then caught herself. Not what? Not true? We both know what you and your friends were discussing that night. The only question is whether Jake here knows about your little voting session. Jake looked between us, confusion creeping across his perfect features. What voting session? Oh, this is Rich, I said, settling into the armchair that used to be mine. Sarah, you didn't tell him about the vote? About how you and your bridesmaids were deciding whether I was worth keeping? About how you were already texting him behind my back? That's enough, Sarah snapped, but I could see panic flickering in her eyes. Or maybe you didn't tell him about the other guys you were texting. Because Jake, buddy, I hate to break it to you, but you weren't the only one she was keeping on the back burner. This was a bluff, but it hit her.
He just gave me a massage. That's it!
Remember, I won't be a cuckold!
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
Home. Jake's jaw tightened and he turned to look at Sarah with new suspicion. He's lying, Sarah said quickly. David, you need to leave. Now. I'll go, I said, standing up. But I'll be back. This is my apartment, after all. And Sarah, you might want to check your Instagram analytics. I noticed your engagement rates have been dropping lately. All those new followers, but the likes and comments aren't keeping pace. That's usually a sign of fake accounts, isn't it? Someone buying followers to inflate their numbers? Her face went white. Bingo. See you around, neighbors, I said cheerfully, heading for the door. Jake, good luck with the family business. I'm sure your dad's thrilled about his son's choice in girlfriends. I left them standing there in the ruins of their perfect evening, already planning my next move. The thing about revenge is that it requires patience and precision. Rush in swinging and you just look crazy. But take your time, gather intelligence, and strike at exactly the right moment. That's how you destroy someone's entire world. I spent the next 2 weeks settling back into Millbrook life, reestablishing old connections and making some new ones. My first stop was Murphy's gym, the old school weight room where I'd been working out before Sarah convinced me to switch to her trendy fitness studio. Well, look who's back, said Tommy Murphy, the owner, as I walked through the door. Heard you caused quite a stir at the Willowbrook Manor. News travels fast in this town, I replied, signing up for a new membership. Faster when it's that good, Tommy grinned. Half the guys in here saw the videos online. That fruit throw was a thing of beauty, my friend. Murphy's was the kind of place where construction workers, mechanics, and other blue-collar guys came to lift heavy weights and talk shit. It was also, I'd learned, where a lot of them brought their personal problems, including, as it turned out, problems with Jake Morrison. That pretty boy owes half the contractors in town money, said Big Mike, an electrician who'd been coming to Murphy's for 20 years. Keeps hiring people to work on his properties, then finding excuses not to pay the full amount. His properties? I asked, loading plates onto the bench press. Yeah, he's got 3 gyms around town. Well, 2.5, really. Word is he's about to lose the lease on the one in Riverside because he's behind on rent. This was interesting. Sarah's social media painted Jake as a successful entrepreneur, but the reality seemed more complicated. How behind, I asked. 3 months, last I heard, and the equipment loans on all 3 locations? Those are getting called in too. I filed this information away and kept listening. Over the next week, I learned that Jake Morrison's fitness empire was essentially a house of cards, propped up by his family's money and a lot of creative accounting. The trust fund baby comment I'd made had been more accurate than I'd realized. But Jake's financial problems were just the appetizer. The main course came from an unexpected source, my old neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson was 73 years old, lived alone with 2 cats, and spent most of her time watching the neighborhood through her front window. She'd always liked me, mainly because I helped her with her computer problems and never complained when her cats used my flower beds as a litter box. David, dear, she said when I stopped by to help her set up a new tablet. I'm so glad you're back. I've been worried about that girl of yours. Sarah's not my girl anymore, Mrs. Henderson, I reminded her gently. Oh, I know that. But she's been having such trouble lately. All those arguments with her friends, the screaming matches with her parents, and that young man she's been seeing. He's not very nice to her. My ears perked up. Not nice how? Well, I don't like to gossip, she said, which meant she absolutely loved to gossip. But I've seen him grab her arm quite roughly when they're arguing. And the language he uses? My late husband was a sailor, and even he didn't talk like that. When was this? Just last week. They were arguing about money, from what I could hear. Something about her needing to ask her parents for help, and him saying she needed to pull her weight, or he'd find someone who would. I helped Mrs. Henderson with her tablet, and filed away this information too. Sarah's perfect relationship was apparently not so perfect behind closed doors. But the real gold mine came from an unexpected source. My old college roommate Pete, who now worked as a private investigator. You want me to look into what exactly? Pete asked when I called him. Just background checks, I said. Sarah Martinez, Jake Morrison, and a few of their associates. Nothing illegal, just public records, social media analysis, that kind of thing. This is about the wedding thing, isn't it? This is about making sure I have all the facts before I decide what to do next. Pete was quiet for a moment. David, I've known you since we were 18. You're not the vengeful type. What did they do to you? I told him about the vote, about the 3 years of subtle humiliation, about how Sarah had turned our destroyed relationship into a career boost while painting me as an abuser. Jesus, Pete said when I finished. Okay, give me a week. I'll see what I can dig up. A week later, Pete called me back with a file that was even more damning than I'd hoped. Your ex-fiancée is in deeper trouble than she's letting on, he said. The promotion at Morrison and Associates? It came with a salary bump, but also a lot more responsibility. She's been working on some high-profile cases, and word is she's in over her head. There have been complaints filed with the state bar about her handling of client communications. What kind of complaints? Missed deadlines, failure to return calls, unprofessional behavior on social media. Nothing that would get her disbarred, but enough to damage her reputation if it became public knowledge. And Jake? Oh, that's the good stuff. His fitness business is basically bankrupt. He owes money to everyone, equipment suppliers, landlords, contractors. His dad has been bailing him out, but even Morrison Sr. is getting tired of it. There's talk that Jake might get cut off entirely if he doesn't turn things around soon. Anything else? Well, Pete's voice took on a conspiratorial tone. This is where it gets really interesting. Remember Jessica, your ex's former best friend? The maid of honor? What about her? She's been having an affair with Jake Morrison. For months, apparently. Started before your wedding, actually. I've got photos, credit card records, showing hotel visits, the whole 9 yards. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Sarah didn't know her boyfriend was cheating on her with her former best friend. Jake was essentially broke and being supported by his family's money. And Sarah's legal career was hanging by a thread. Pete, I said finally, you've just given me everything I need to destroy both their lives. What are you going to do? I smiled, looking out my window toward the apartment where Sarah and Jake were probably planning their perfect future together. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. The Millbrook Community Center's annual spring fundraiser was exactly the kind of event Sarah lived for. Local influencers, business leaders, and social climbers all gathered in one place to see and be seen while pretending to care about charity. Sarah had been promoting her appearance at the event for weeks on social media, positioning herself as a rising young professional giving back to the community. It was also the perfect venue for my grand finale. I'd spent 2 weeks setting everything in motion. Anonymous tips to the state bar about Sarah's professional conduct, carefully timed to arrive just before the fundraiser. Strategic leaks to local gossip blogs about Jake's financial troubles. And most importantly, a series of carefully orchestrated social media posts designed to draw all the key players to the same place at the same time. The community center was packed when I arrived, dressed in my best suit and carrying a tablet loaded with 6 months' worth of research. Sarah was holding court near the silent auction tables, looking radiant in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Jake stood beside her, playing the devoted boyfriend role to perfection. Jessica was there too, I noticed with satisfaction. She'd been keeping her distance from Sarah lately, but she couldn't resist an event like this. The three of them in the same room with no idea what was coming. David? I turned to find my mother approaching, looking concerned. My parents had been invited to the fundraiser. They'd been pillars of the Millbrook community for decades, but they clearly hadn't expected to see me here. "Hi, Mom," I said, giving her a hug. "Don't worry. I'm not here to cause trouble." "Are you sure about that?" she asked, eyeing the tablet in my hands. "Because you have that same look you had when you were 12, and planning to get back at the Hendricks boy for breaking your bike." "I'm just here to set the record straight," I said. "Some things have come to light that I think people should know about." Before she could respond, the event organizer took the microphone to begin the evening's program. There would be speeches from local business leaders, a presentation about the community center's programs, and then an open mic session where attendees could share their thoughts about the importance of community involvement. I'd signed up for the open mic session that morning. Sarah spoke first, delivering a polished presentation about the importance of pro bono legal work and her commitment to serving the underprivileged. The crowd ate it up, applauding enthusiastically as she described her volunteer work with local nonprofits. Work that, according to Pete's research, consisted mainly of photo opportunities and social media posts. Jake followed with his own speech about the role of fitness in community health, promoting his gyms and positioning himself as a local business success story. He was charismatic and confident, every inch the golden boy his family name suggested. Too bad it was all built on lies. When the open mic session began, I was the third person to approach the podium. The crowd was relaxed now, wine flowing freely, as people settled in for what they expected to be a series of brief, boring testimonials about community spirit. "Good evening," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. "For those who don't know me, I'm David Chen. Some of you might remember me from the Willowbrook Manor incident last fall." A ripple of recognition went through the crowd. Sarah's face went white, and she started moving toward the exit, but Jake caught her arm and whispered something in her ear, probably telling her that running would look worse than staying. He was right, but it wouldn't matter. "I'm here tonight because I believe in truth," I continued, "and there are some truths about members of our community that I think you should know." I tapped my tablet, and the first image appeared on the large screen behind me, a photo of Jake and Jessica entering a hotel together, time-stamped 3 days before my wedding. The reaction was immediate. Gasps echoed through the room, and I could see people turning to look at Sarah, Jake, and Jessica. Sarah's mouth fell open in shock, while Jake's face turned red with anger. "This is just the beginning," I said calmly. "Over the past 6 months, I've been investigating the people who destroyed my relationship and then used that destruction to advance their own careers and social media presence." The next slide showed Jake's business financial records, the ones Pete had obtained through public filings and court documents. Debt, late payments, and a pattern of stiffing contractors and suppliers. "Jake Morrison has been presenting himself as a successful entrepreneur," I said. "But the reality is that his businesses are failing, and he's been using his family's money and influence to avoid the consequences of his poor decisions." Jake started moving toward the stage, but my next words stopped him cold. "Including using his relationship with Sarah Martinez to pressure his father into giving her a promotion at Morrison and Associates, despite her ongoing professional conduct issues." The screen now showed copies of the complaints filed against Sarah with the state bar, along with screenshots of her social media posts that violated client confidentiality rules. "Sarah has been portraying herself as a victim of an abusive relationship," I continued. "But the truth is that she spent 3 years systematically undermining and humiliating me while planning to dump me at our own wedding. She turned our destroyed relationship into social media content, gaining hundreds of thousands of followers by playing the victim of domestic abuse, a serious charge that trivializes the experiences of real abuse victims." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Sarah was crying, but whether from shame or rage, I couldn't tell. "But the most interesting part," I said, advancing to my final slide, "is how this whole network of deception connects. Jessica Walsh, Sarah's former maid of honor, has been having an affair with Jake Morrison for over 8 months. Sarah doesn't know, Jake's family doesn't know, and Jessica's husband definitely doesn't know." The final image was devastating. A photo of Jake and Jessica in a passionate embrace outside Jessica's house, taken just 2 weeks ago. These three people have built their success on lies, manipulation, and betrayal, I concluded. They've used social media to craft false narratives, family connections to avoid consequences, and other people's pain to advance their own agendas. I thought the community should know who they really are before continuing to support them. I stepped back from the microphone and surveyed the chaos I'd created. Sarah was sobbing openly now, her carefully applied makeup running down her face. Jake was shouting something about lawsuits and defamation, but his words were lost in the general commotion. Jessica had disappeared entirely, probably making a run for her car. The crowd was buzzing with shocked conversations, phones out as people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Some were already posting about it on social media. Sarah's downfall would be as public and viral as her rise had been. And that, I said, picking up my tablet and walking toward the exit, is how you destroy someone's entire world without throwing a single piece of rotten fruit. As I reached the door, I turned back one final time. Sarah was surrounded by concerned friends and curious onlookers, her perfect influencer facade completely shattered. Jake was on his phone, probably calling his father to try to do damage control. The community center buzzed with the kind of scandal that would be talked about for years. My mother appeared at my elbow, shaking her head but smiling slightly. "Feel better?" she asked. "You know what?" I said, breathing the cool spring air. "I really do." Behind us, Sarah's voice rose above the crowd, shrill with desperation. "He's lying! He's a psychopath! Don't believe anything he says!" But it was too late. The truth was out, documented and undeniable. Her world was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I walked to my car, got in, and drove home to my apartment where I'd be living alone and loving every minute of it. Some stories don't have happy endings, but sometimes they have satisfying ones.